This story follows middle-aged Kim Jun, a researcher at the Agency for Defense Development. One day, he's murdered by a colleague while trying to protect a vital data chip containing the manufacturing processes for Korea's most advanced weapons technology. But after his death, he suddenly wakes up in the body of his old friend, back in the 1990s, on the exact date that friend had died in his past life. Now, Kim Jun is living as the so-called troublemaker son of a wealthy businessman. As the child of the man's mistress, he's treated like an outcast, ignored by everyone except his stepmother. But here's the twist. In his previous life, Kim Jun had swallowed the chip to keep it safe. Now, even in this new body, he still holds access to all the knowledge and data it contained. Armed with the future's most advanced military secrets and a second chance at life, he sets out to make a name for himself by recreating those weapons ahead of time. But the path won't be easy. The story begins with Kim Jun desperately running for his life as a man chases him with a gun. Just as the attacker is about to fire, an old man named Kim Hee-won intervenes, holding the assailant back to give Jun a chance to escape. With tears in his eyes, Jun keeps running without looking back, apologizing to Hee-won for fleeing like a coward. Meanwhile, in the same building, a fierce gunfight erupts between the police and a group of terrorists. After a tense battle, the authorities manage to subdue all the attackers. Later, a news broadcast reports that a terrorist attack took place inside the Agency for Defense Development. Fortunately, most of the assailants have been taken down. The report further reveals that the terrorists were after Korea's cutting-edge weapons technology and had attempted to steal a data chip containing critical manufacturing processes. The scene shifts to Kim Jun, who is now in hiding, clutching the data chip he is desperately trying to protect. Lee Ho-jung, the armed man from earlier, is searching for him, and by the way, he already killed Kim Hee-won. At first, Ho-jung tries to coax Jun out, pointing out that he could have easily escaped by now. When that fails, he changes tactics, offering a hefty reward in exchange for the data chip, on the condition that Jun keeps quiet about everything. However, Jun knows that the information on the chip is far more valuable than his own life. Realizing that he won't be able to evade Ho-jung forever, he comes up with a desperate plan, swallowing the data chip to keep it out of enemy hands. Unfortunately for him, Ho-jung catches up at that very moment, witnessing everything. Furious, Lee Ho-jung emptied an entire magazine into Kim Jun, frustrated that he had gone to such extremes. He couldn't understand why Jun would rather swallow the data chip than just pretend he didn't know where the data chip was. But even in his final moments, Jun had one last message for the traitor, raising his middle finger because a backstabber like Ho-jung deserved nothing less. After all, they were colleagues. Before Ho-jung could do anything else, the police arrived, ordering him to freeze or be shot on sight. Ignoring the warning, he made a move and, well, let's just say he got properly taken down. And no, not in that way. As Jun took his last breath, he felt relieved knowing the data chip was safe. It wasn't long before people figured out where it was. Right inside his stomach. Honoring his sacrifice, the government later awarded the late director Kim Jun the Order of National Security Merit for giving his life to protect the country's classified technology. And that's all. The happy ending. Bye-bye, guys. Kim Jun, somehow still conscious, wasn't sure if he was dead or not, because if he was dead, he wouldn't be able to think about it, right? Suddenly, his vision blurred, and he started seeing something. Was this what people called your life flashing before your eyes? But instead of nostalgic memories, he saw a woman crying and desperately trying to wake him up. When he didn't respond, she suddenly slapped the hell out of him. Jun jolted awake, completely confused. If this was supposed to be his life flashing before his eyes, then why did that slap hurt so much? The woman in front of him looked genuinely worried, calling him sir. Jun, still dazed, had no idea where the hell he was. Judging from the pain in his head, he assumed he must have been hit pretty hard. But something about this whole near-death vision felt way too real. Turns out he was in a bar, very much alive, and had just been smashed over the head with a bottle. And according to the guys standing in front of him, he was the one who hit them first. The woman who had been trying to wake Kim Jun up quickly assessed the situation and attempted to strike a deal with the guys in front of them, hoping to keep their mouths shut. At first, they resisted, but the moment she pulled out some cash, their attitudes changed instantly. They suddenly became saints, apologized, and left without another word. With the trouble handled, the woman grabbed June and insisted on taking him to a hospital to get his head injury checked. Still confused, June asked if he knew her. Hearing this, she immediately panicked, worrying that his head injury might be worse than she thought. Wasting no time, she pulled out her phone and made a call. A little while later, a tall man arrived to escort June. They led him outside and into a sleek Mercedes. Just looking at the luxury car, June knew there was no way this was his. He didn't have the money or the skills to own something like this. When he voiced his confusion, they reassured him that they already knew. After all, this wasn't his car, it belonged to the woman. By the way, her name was Kim Jia. However, June's biggest shock came when he glanced at the car's window. His reflection stared back at him, but instead of his usual self, he saw a young and strangely familiar face. It was Hyun-sung's face staring back at him. As they got into the car, Kim June took a moment to process everything. He then explained that on January 5th, 1998, his friend Jin Hyun-sung had died after getting into a bar fight. At the time, June had been studying in the US and couldn't attend the funeral due to visa issues. That date, January 5th, had been burned into his memory, not just because it was the day Hyun-sung died, but also because it was his own birthday. Before he could think further, something important caught his eye. A panty shot from the side. Priorities. Shaking off the distraction, June started piecing things together. It seemed like he had somehow ended up in the body of his deceased friend, who had died all those years ago. At the hospital, the doctor reassured them that there was no significant damage to worry about. Kim Jia suggested he stay overnight just to be safe, but June insisted on going home. He needed a quiet, dark place to organize his thoughts. Now, to clarify, June may be in Hyun-sung's body, but we're still calling him June, just so things don't get confusing. Back to the story. Just as he was about to leave, the door burst open. Standing there was none other than Hyun-sung's father, who also happened to be the chairman of Jaewoo Group. As Hyun-sung's father entered the room, his first words were sharp. He demanded to know what the hell had happened. Kim Jia quickly stepped in, apologizing, but then reassured him that the other party wouldn't say anything since she had already bribed them. After hearing this, he didn't dwell on it further. Instead, he issued a stern warning. The media must not get involved, and if rumors spread, there would be consequences. With that, he turned and left. As soon as he was gone, Kim Jia tried to comfort June, telling him not to take his words too seriously. But June was still in shock. He had expected a scolding or at least some harsh words, yet he had received nothing. This explained a lot: Hyun-sung's rebellious nature, his hatred toward his family, and why he had been so distant from them. With the situation settled, they finally headed home. Later, as June sat alone, gathering his thoughts, his eyes landed on something strange, a chip-like tattoo on his wrist. He had no idea what it was, but the moment he focused on it, a digital window suddenly popped up. The screen asked for a username ID and password. Confused, June tried to figure out what it was, but then it hit him. This was the data chip, the very same data check he had been trying to protect before he died. Testing his theory, he entered his ID and password, and just like that, the system unlocked. What he saw next left him speechless. Classified information on Korea's most advanced weapons up until 2024. Blueprints, manufacturing processes, and essential material data, everything was stored inside this chip. In his previous life, technological development had been nearly impossible due to Japan patenting most essential materials. But now, in 1998, those patents didn't exist yet. It felt like hitting the jackpot. If he could develop these materials first and file a minefield of patents, his future would be set for life. With access to cutting-edge weapons technology unimaginable in this era and blueprints in his hands, he had the potential to revolutionize the industry. Excitement surged through him, but his joy was short-lived. Out of nowhere, an excruciating pain shot through his head, so intense it felt like divine punishment for his greed. But that wasn't it. He was absorbing Hyun-sung's memories, and they were far from pleasant. Hyun-sung had been unwanted by both his father and mother, possibly because he was born from an affair, his father's mistress's child. Through the memories, June also learned that Kim Jia wasn't just some concerned woman. She was actually Hyun-sung's secretary. The overwhelming flood of memories became too much, and before he could process anything further, the pain knocked him out cold. By the time he regained consciousness, it was already morning. Now that he had all of Hyun-sung's memories, June realized that his initial impression of him being just a spoiled brat was wrong. However, that didn't change the fact that Hyun-sung had caused far too many problems, leading to him falling out of favor with his family. He had even been demoted to a minor affiliate, and at this rate, he was on the verge of being kicked out entirely. But before worrying about the future, his first priority was to clean up yesterday's mess. The best way to do that? Apologize to his father. Since a face-to-face apology would be more effective, he asked Kim Jia, his secretary, to arrange a meeting with his father. And besides, based on how genuinely worried she had been at the bar, he figured she might actually be a valuable ally moving forward. When June arrived at his father's company, he didn't even get the chance to step into the office before being blocked by two employees. They assumed he was there to cause trouble again and immediately shut him down, claiming that the chairman's schedule was completely booked for the day, which was just a polite way of saying, "Don't bother coming in." June, however, wasn't fazed at all. With a charming smile, he assured them that he would simply wait quietly in the office until his father had a moment to spare. And just like that, their hearts skipped a beat. Ah, what a cruel world, where good looks can change everything. Once inside the office, he began seriously considering his approach. Should he kneel and beg for forgiveness? No, that wouldn't work. His family didn't care how much he repented. The only thing that truly mattered was proving himself as a competent businessman, like a proper heir. As June waited, his eyes wandered across his father's desk, where he noticed a report about a firepower test. The document detailed efforts to enhance the K1A1 tank's 120mm APF-SDS rounds, a new Sabot round development project. From what he remembered, during this period, Korea was attempting to compete with American depleted uranium rounds by using tungsten-based alternatives. But to him, this was a waste of time. In his previous life, Korea hadn't successfully developed tungsten rounds of this caliber until around 2024. It had taken over 30 years to create penetrator materials capable of withstanding extreme pressure. Then, something clicked. He had the blueprint in the data chip. His father still had about an hour before arriving, so June saw an opportunity. He quickly drafted a proposal, outlining an alternative approach using the future technology stored in the chip. By the time he finished, the chairman had arrived. His father seemed genuinely surprised to see him there. June greeted him politely, saying he had been waiting to speak with him, referring to him as chairman. But the chairman wasn't having it. He cut him off immediately, telling him to drop the act and speak normally, just like he always did. Inside the office, the chairman wasted no time and told Kim June to get to the point. However, Kim June couldn't help but feel disheartened. Hyun-sung's father didn't even look at him. He knew the man had long grown tired of dealing with his troublemaker son. Excuses no longer mattered, and expectations had completely faded. It was the same indifferent look Hyun-sung had always received from his father, and Kim June had decided it was time to change that. He apologized, but his father immediately tore into him, showing no patience for his words. Eventually, he delivered the final blow. Hyun-sung would be removed from the group affiliates, meaning he would no longer have access to Jaewoo, their group. He knew that this wasn't just a business decision, it was a complete severance of ties. Despite this, Kim June remained composed and accepted whatever decision his father made. However, before anything was finalized, he requested that his proposal for developing new Sabot rounds be reviewed. He explained that he had come up with a concept for stronger penetrators. His father, skeptical, glanced at the document, believing he had already seen all the reports and that further improvements were impossible. The chairman was shocked as he looked over Kim June's proposal. A 20% increase in penetration power was unheard of. Kim June pressed forward, asking for a chance to prove himself, promising he could have it ready within 3 months. However, his father remained skeptical. To him, achieving 20% more power was simply impossible. The idea that the infamous Hyun-sung could develop such an extraordinary material seemed absurd. He completely overlooked the fact that his son had earned a PhD in metallurgical engineering. Instead, his mind wandered to a more suspicious thought. Perhaps Hyun-sung had stolen German technology to deceive him. After all, only a country like Germany possessed such top-tier alloy technology. Yet both of them knew deep down that Hyun-sung wasn't capable of pulling off something like that. When confronted, Kim June bluntly denied the accusation, and his confidence was enough to make the chairman believe him. To settle any doubts, Kim Jun suggested verifying the research at the Miletus Research Institute. Their senior researchers could easily determine whether the technology was genuinely his or stolen from Germany. The chairman decided to move forward and immediately called his secretary. He instructed them to fax the documents to Miletus Research Institute and personally relay the request to Director Myung Sung-un, asking for immediate verification and a report. Hearing this name, Kim Jun was stunned. He had no idea Myung Sung-un was even at Miletus. What shocked him even more was that it was actually Hyun Sung who had brought Myung Sung-un there. Back in their case days, Myung Sung-un had been both his and Hyun Sung's professor, dedicating his life to university research, as far as Kim Jun remembered. Yet here he was, now serving as the director of Miletus Research Institute. This wasn't the future he knew. Suddenly more memories rushed in, and it became clear 3 years ago, Hyun Sung himself had recruited Professor Myung to lay the foundation for his work at Miletus. History had been altered. After some time, the chairman received a call from Professor Myung, who was equally shocked. The first thing he asked was, who on earth had developed such technology? However, the chairman didn't reveal anything just yet, saying he would call back later. Hanging up, the chairman turned to Kim Jun, knowing he wouldn't have played such a big card without expecting something in return. However, Kim Jun hadn't even considered that part yet. Chairman offered the position of purchasing team leader, but it wasn't what he wanted. Instead, he had his eyes set on something else, the role of development leader. The chairman was shocked. This wasn't the son he knew. From Hyun Sung's usual perspective, the purchasing team leader position would have been the better choice, offering more opportunities to pocket money. But what Kim Jun said next completely caught him off guard. Kim Jun firmly stated that he wasn't after money. If that were his goal, he could have easily sold the blueprint elsewhere, like to Lick Nexwin, who would have paid him far more than what he could get here. The chairman had no idea what had caused such a drastic change in him. However, the development leader position wasn't something that could be handed over so easily. It required discussion with the executive board, so the chairman told Kim Jun to wait. Just as Kim Jun was about to leave, someone entered the office. Hyun Sung's half-brother, Hyun Chol. As one of the executive directors of Miletus, he immediately saw Hyun Sung as nothing more than an annoyance. With clear sarcasm, Hyun Chol remarked that it was fortunate Hyun Sung was returning to Miletus since they had been struggling to find capable talent lately. Kim Jun, unfazed by the remark, decided to take his leave. From this point on, he knew things were about to get interesting. Later, Kim Jun was in Hyun Sung's office. Yes, Hyun Sung actually had an office, though he never really bothered with work. Kim Jun was reviewing some documents, trying to grasp the overall business landscape before making his return to Miletus. However, going through the financial statements of an entire conglomerate wasn't something one could skim through like a neighborhood market receipt. It was going to take a while. Seeing this, Kim Jia, who was with him, was told to leave for the day. But she refused. She couldn't just leave while he was still working and insisted on helping. So Kim Jun handed her a task, summarizing the defense affiliates for him. She began with Jaewoo Daeon, one of the 3 major defense affiliates under the Jaewoo Group, specializing in developing military vehicles like tanks and self-propelled artillery. Next was Cosmos Euro, a company originally established for fighter jet maintenance. Over time, it had accumulated enough technological expertise to begin licensing and producing aircraft engines. And finally, there was Miletus, the company Kim Jun had to take control of at all costs. Securing Miletus meant that Cosmos Euro and Jaewoo Daeon would naturally fall into his hands as well. To the general public, Miletus was just an obscure defense contractor specializing in shell manufacturing. But in reality, it was the core holding company of the Jaewoo Group. Its expertise in materials chemistry and munitions manufacturing pipelines made it an unparalleled growth driver for advanced weaponry. Kim Jia finally completed her summary and pointed out that Miletus's revenue was significantly higher than the other affiliates. To Kim Jun, this was expected. After all, without raw materials, weapon production was impossible. Moreover, once developed, weapon materials had astronomical added value, which was precisely why he had insisted on securing Miletus. However, Kim Jia had a different perspective. She believed he chose Miletus because it was a lesser-known company, making it easier for him to plant parachute executives. Just then, her phone rang. It was a call from the chairman. He informed Kim Jun that, starting tomorrow, he was to report directly to Miletus's development team as the team leader. Later, Kim Jun was seen in a car reflecting on his progress. It had already been a month since he took charge of the development team, and the development of the new armor-piercing shell was progressing smoothly. However, he knew that simply completing the development and moving to the mass production stage wouldn't be enough. He still had to succeed in gaining Hyunsung's father's trust, but even that alone wouldn't secure his position. He needed to solidify his position to the point where he could lead the development of future weapons. For that, he required a definitive breakthrough, something that would truly set him apart. His goal wasn't just to improve existing technology. He wanted to create a weapon that was far ahead of its time. Lost in thought during the car ride, he barely noticed the occasional glances from the driver in the rearview mirror. His deep concentration must have caught the driver's attention. The man behind the wheel was Assistant Yang, a former judo athlete with skills impressive enough to have made it to the national team. However, thanks to Hyunsung's meddling and his overly big-hearted nature, these two had crossed paths under unusual circumstances. Years ago, Hyunsung had spotted Assistant Yang by chance in a hospital hallway, looking utterly defeated over his mother's surgery costs. Despite being complete strangers, Hyunsung had stepped in and covered the full cost of the surgery. That single act of kindness had created an unshakable bond between them. From that day on, Assistant Yang had insisted on repaying the favor by working as Hyunsung's assistant. Curious, Kim Jun asked him if he ever regretted giving up his athletic career. He even told him outright that he could quit any time if he wanted to. But Assistant Yang didn't hesitate. He had no regrets at all. If it weren't for Hyunsung, his mother wouldn't have survived. He had already made up his mind. He would work until retirement and leave with a solid severance package. After some time, they finally arrived at the Miletus Integrated Research Center. As Kim Jun wandered through the facility, he unexpectedly ran into Professor Myung. It was the first time he had seen him since gaining this body. Kim Jun couldn't help but be concerned about the professor's drinking habits. Without hesitation, he advised him to quit now because in about 10 years he would pass away from liver cirrhosis, and of course he can't just say this to him. However, Professor Myung simply laughed, glad to see his pupil again and able to joke around like old times. Shifting the conversation to work, Kim Jun asked if the development of the armor-piercing shells was progressing smoothly. The professor confirmed that everything was going well. With all the necessary equipment available, there were no major issues. In fact, no other research facility in the world had such a diverse set of material processing equipment. By the next month, the shells would be ready for trial production. However, there was one issue. The old and new shells had nearly identical weights, yet the muzzle pressure kept dropping when firing the new ones. Kim Jun immediately recognized the cause. The altered shape of the new shells was affecting the instantaneous pressure within the barrel. Professor Myung was stunned. Just by standing there, Kim Jun had pinpointed the problem. The professor was freaking out, realizing that he had completely overlooked such a crucial detail. Now he found himself in the position of learning from his own pupil. Then, out of nowhere, Professor Myung brought up Kim Jun's real body, the one currently abroad. Kim Jun explained that he was still searching but hadn't found anything yet. Time passed, and about a month later, Kim Jia was practically glowing at the office. The reason? Something significant had happened. The 20th test firing was finally complete. Kim Jun decided to watch it with her, though. To be honest, he wasn't particularly thrilled. He had already seen this weapon in action in his past life, so there was no way he'd get excited over it now. They watched the entire test, and as expected, everything functioned flawlessly. Kim Jia, on the other hand, was completely lost. The test was so fast that she couldn't even tell if it had succeeded or not. Kim Jun reassured her that it worked perfectly, and that from now on, people would refer to these armor-piercing shells as the Grim Reaper. He then told Kim Jia to report the success to the chairman immediately, but she informed him that Director Myung had already submitted the report. With that out of the way, Kim Jun shifted his focus to preparing presentation materials for the mass production meeting. After this, he was certain the chairman would move forward with military mass production. Kim Jia received another call and quickly informed Kim Jun that it was for him, The chairman himself had summoned him. Kim Jun guessed it was probably just a reminder to hurry up with the mass production meeting preparations. However, as Kim Jia adjusted his tie, she pointed out that this wasn't the case. The location wasn't the headquarters, it was a specific hotel, which likely meant the chairman was inviting him for lunch instead. With that in mind, they quickly headed to the hotel. Upon arrival, Kim Jun entered the private room, only to realize that the chairman wasn't alone. The group's executives were also present. That could only mean one thing. This wasn't just a casual meal. As he took his seat, he asked his father if there was a problem. The chairman reassured him that there was none. He simply wanted to have lunch and discuss something important. He had read the report on the armor-piercing shells, and to be honest, the results had exceeded his expectations. Watching the test footage made him feel like rewarding the people who knocked some sense into Kim Jun. And yes, he was referring to the bar incident where Kim Jun got hit in the head with beer bottles. The chairman was genuinely proud. Not just as a company leader, but as a father. The chairman went on to explain that he had authorized bonus payments for the research team. He then told Kim Jun that if there was anything he wanted, now was the time to speak up. And this time, Kim Jun actually had something in mind. He requested that the chairman cover the licensing fee for the new armor-piercing rounds. At first, the chairman thought he was joking and tried to brush it off, suggesting that they could call it even with just this lunch. However, Kim Jun was completely serious. There were things he had been wanting to buy, and this was the perfect opportunity. Now, it looked like the chairman would have to sell the brand new yacht he had just purchased without even using it. After all, as the saying goes, you can't deny your bloodline. Kim Jun, with some advice, pointed out that flaunting a yacht during times like this would only bring criticism. But considering Hun Sung's background, he wasn't exactly in a position to talk either. Shifting back to the main topic, the chairman explained the real reason he had called Kim Jun here. It was about the production request. The development of the new armor-piercing rounds had been a project that the Army had been persistently hounding them about. Now that the data was in place, the chairman had submitted it, and to his surprise, the military was holding the production meeting today. All in just one day. Even the chairman was taken aback by how eagerly they had been waiting for something new. The military would inform them of the production quantity immediately after the meeting. Until the presidential briefing, however, the details had to remain strictly confidential. The chairman had a friend in the 7th Mobile Corps, so he promised to give them an early heads-up about the production quantity and meeting. Based on wartime reserve considerations, the chairman estimated that they would order at least 100,000 rounds. Kim Jun quickly calculated that this would amount to about 20 billion won in sales. However, sales figures weren't the key factor. Profit margins mattered more. According to the chairman, the profit would be roughly 4.5 billion won. But Kim Jun pointed out that this was specialized ammunition, meaning the margin should be closer to 30%, which would put profits around 6 billion won. He believed this was completely achievable. With this profit, Miletus would be able to fund its own advanced weapon development independently without relying on military support. This caught the chairman's attention. He was intrigued and asked what Kim Jun was planning. Seizing the opportunity, Kim Jun immediately started explaining his vision for a new weapon. However, before he could finish, he was abruptly interrupted by a phone call. One of the executive director's phones started ringing. The caller? None other than the chairman's friend from the 7th Mobile Corps. The director spoke on the phone for a while before hanging up, relaying the bad news. Really bad news. Instead of a massive order, the military was only planning to purchase 7,000 rounds per year. Even the chairman's friend in the 7th Mobile Corps was caught off guard and apologized for the unexpected outcome. This was a disaster. Producing only 7,000 rounds wouldn't even come close to covering the development costs. The chairman, clearly frustrated, immediately called someone. After a brief conversation, he hung up and explained the situation. It turned out that the so-called budget cuts were just an excuse. The real reason? Next year, a major defense project, completely unrelated to the Daewoo Group, was set to launch. If they spent too much on armor-piercing rounds now, their next year's budget might be reduced. So they slashed funding for this project instead. The scale of that upcoming defense project? A staggering 2 trillion won. the chairman sighed. The lack of bribery played a big role here. Since he refused to do business through corruption, they had lost out. Still, he told Kim June not to be discouraged. This was nothing more than political maneuvering, and in business, losses like these were inevitable. He was about to leave when Kim June suddenly stopped him. Kim June had a plan. According to him, they hadn't suffered a loss at all. The chairman frowned, not following Kim June's logic. With only 7,000 rounds being ordered, they'd have to produce at a loss, and since this was the defense industry, they couldn't just refuse to supply them. It wasn't a business where profits could take priority over national security. But Kim June had a completely different idea. Rather than taking the loss quietly, he planned to sell to others, the same people who had backstabbed the Jaewoo group after demanding they act. If Jaewoo simply presented alternative buyers, the military wouldn't even be able to complain. All Kim June needed now was his father's approval. If the chairman backed him, he would take care of everything else. Later, Kim June and the chairman stood outside the U.S. military office, ready for a meeting that could turn their situation around. The reason they were here? Kim June had a plan. If the Korean military wouldn't buy their armor-piercing shells, then they'd sell them to the U.S. military instead. Thanks to his past life's memories, Kim June knew that at this point in time, the U.S. was in desperate need of these shells. The chairman, however, was hesitant. He had spent years building relationships with the Korean military, and selling their new weapon to another country could damage that trust. Deep down, he also didn't like the idea of supplying foreign forces with their technology. He figured that Kim June just didn't understand the long-term consequences of such a move. But Kim June did understand. After all, he was the one who died trying to protect his country in his past life. In the end, the chairman sighed and decided to give it a shot. He handed full authority over to Kim June, declaring that his son's judgment would be his own. With that, they headed inside and met General Hummer. Kim June extended a hand for a handshake, but the general ignored it, his arrogant demeanor making it clear that this meeting was arranged reluctantly. General Hummer was eager to wrap things up, but Kim June wasted no time and got straight to the point. He clarified that they weren't there to make a request, but to present a proposal, an opportunity. To support his case, Kim June laid out his documents. However, General Hummer barely glanced at them, confident that the U.S. military already possessed the best armor-piercing shells in the world. He dismissed Kim June's offer outright, convinced that the shells being proposed were both more expensive and of inferior quality. With a firm tone, General Hummer remarked that, while confidence was admirable, Kim June should have done proper research before coming. Deciding there was no need to continue, he prepared to call off the meeting. But Kim June wasn't done just yet. Before leaving, he insisted on showing a test video. Without waiting for permission, he switched on the TV and played the footage. As the video began, General Hummer immediately analyzed the angle and thickness of the target. To him, there was no way foreign technology could penetrate such a material. It had to be a setup. In his mind, only U.S.-made shells were capable of achieving that level of performance. General Hummer firmly believed that, at best, the shells in the video would only leave a tiny hole in the target, and even that would be an impressive feat for a Korean company. However, as he watched the test footage, he was utterly shocked. It was beyond anything he had expected, and he struggled to comprehend what kind of technology they had developed. Kim June then explained the product's capabilities, revealing that it achieved over 20% higher penetration than the U.S. military's own shells. Even after hearing this, General Hummer found it difficult to accept the results. Kim June reiterated his stance. He hadn't come to request anything but to offer an opportunity. This prompted General Hummer to ask why he was so determined to supply these shells to the U.S. military. In response, Kim June stated that the U.S. was the country that needed them the most right now. He pointed out that the U.S. military was currently facing challenges with radioactive, depleted uranium shells. In such a situation, a tungsten shell that not only outperformed uranium shells, but was also easier to produce and use naturally would be the ideal solution. He also mentioned that he was aware of the U.S. making significant efforts to develop similar technology. This revelation took General Hummer by surprise. His team had been extremely cautious, even with material imports, to prevent any leaks. Yet, according to Kim June, such secrecy was futile. He explained that when it came to specialized metal materials used exclusively for weapons, their movement in the international market could never be completely hidden. In fact, Kim Jun revealed that the US had already abandoned the idea due to the overwhelming costs, making his offer even more significant. Kim Jun continued his explanation, revealing that they had successfully minimized the costly tungsten ratio by substituting it with a new composite alloy. This breakthrough allowed them to significantly reduce production costs. However, he clarified that he wasn't offering something cheap or merely affordable. He was providing an opportunity. Without hesitation, General Hummer gave in. He handed Kim Jun a handwritten recommendation letter, instructing him to attach it to the front of his documents. With this, the proposal would be delivered directly to the highest decision makers. Kim Jun had finally done it. Securing an endorsement from one of the top 10 most powerful figures in the US was a huge achievement. As General Hummer stood up, he admitted that he now fully understood what Kim Jun had meant by offering the US an opportunity. With that, the two finally shook hands, sealing the deal. Bro, I don't know why people think that we US people are arrogant. We aren't, believe me. 10 days later, Kim Jun finally received a call from General Michael, the former head of the U.S. Army's Weapon Acquisition Planning Division. General Michael informed him that he had reviewed all the documents and was impressed. Kim Jun had indeed developed an excellent armor-piercing round. However, after going through the test report, he still had a few questions. He also requested that Kim Jun send some sample rounds for further testing, particularly with Abrams tanks. Another 10 days passed, and after witnessing the test results firsthand, General Michael was completely stunned. Without any hesitation, he immediately asked Kim Jun how many rounds he could produce annually. The answer, around 100,000. Though that number seemed a bit unusual, General Michael reasoned that it was better to start high and leave room for adjustments. Ideally, he wanted even more, but for now, he decided to move forward with a 5-year contract for that quantity. And well, if nothing else, this was classic American behavior through and through. With the deal set in motion, General Michael informed Kim Jun that the next day, a representative from U.S. Forces Korea would visit him with the necessary documents. Just like that, the contract was officially secured. Even the chairman was in shock. This deal meant an annual revenue of around 200 billion won, totaling nearly 1 trillion won over 5 years. Overwhelmed by the success, he even considered throwing a party. However, before any celebrations could happen, trouble arose from the Korean Joint Chiefs of Staff. A few days prior, they had contacted the chairman, pressuring the company to prioritize supplying the Korean military instead. The issue was clear. A private company like theirs had developed superior weapons, and now the Joint Chiefs were worried about losing face if the U.S. military got their hands on these shells first. Kim Jun, however, remained firm. He made it clear that delivering to the initial contractor, the U.S. military, was only natural. With a maximum production capacity of 100,000 rounds per year, even allocating just 7,000 for the Korean military would cause delays in the U.S. shipment. The chairman understood this as well, but he was initially willing to cave to the military's demands. This time, though, Kim Jun wanted to handle things differently. He wasn't just looking to resolve the issue, he wanted to make sure they would never try pulling such stunts again. And surprisingly, the one behind these demands was none other than the chairman's own son. When Kim Jun explained his plan, the chairman could hardly believe his son was starting to think this way. Regardless, they decided to move forward with the plan. Kim Jun then contacted a reporter and decided to reveal everything about the situation. It didn't take long before the news spread like wildfire. Soon, media outlets were buzzing about Miletus's new armor-piercing rounds, which were set to be exported to the U.S. Army. The deal was being hailed as the largest single arms export, expected to significantly aid in overcoming the ongoing foreign exchange crisis. Reports also revealed an interesting twist. The Korean military had originally planned to order 100,000 rounds, but mysteriously, that number had been slashed to just 7,000 units. Meanwhile, the Joint Chiefs of Staff remained completely silent on the matter. Public discussions erupted, with many arguing that Miletus was right to prioritize its first contractor, the U.S. However, the fact that the Korean military couldn't even secure 7,000 units over 5 years was seen as a major loss for the country, one that could set their military capabilities back by over 2 decades. Back at his office, Kim Jun couldn't help but laugh at how things were unfolding, just as he had predicted. And sure enough, he was soon summoned to the chairman's office immediately. Upon his arrival, he found that the Joint Chiefs of Staff were already there, waiting for him. As soon as he stepped in, the president of the Joint Chiefs wasted no time, pointing at him and accusing him of being the one who had created this entire mess. Kim Jun, however, saw things differently. He believed that his company, as a profit-driven business, had no reason to accept production levels that didn't even cover development costs. Why should they be criticized for prioritizing their first and largest contractor? As the tension in the room eased, the president of the Joint Chiefs shifted his approach, acting as if he were doing Kim Jun a favor. He asked him to prepare and finalize the contract for the Korean military. But Kim Jun was firm. He outright rejected the request, stating that there was simply no available supply for the Korean military. They were already struggling to meet the massive U.S. order. At that moment, the president of the Joint Chiefs finally grasped the reality of the situation and, rather than demanding, began requesting Kim Jun consider their position as well. Watching all of this unfold, one of the Joint Chiefs couldn't help but be impressed by Kim Jun's handling of the situation. It was then that Kim Jun decided to execute the main part of his plan. He calmly stated that it wasn't entirely impossible to accommodate the Korean military's request. Hearing this, the president of the Joint Chiefs immediately jumped in, offering his full support. Kim Jun then laid out the real issue. The current bottleneck was the lack of production lines. Building a new factory wasn't a viable short-term solution, but the fastest workaround was to convert the high-explosive shell production line into an armor-piercing round line. Of course, reconfiguring the factory would require a significant investment, and to recover the costs, they would need to increase production by at least 20,000 additional rounds annually, maintaining that output for at least 3 years. In conclusion, for the deal to work, the Korean military would have to purchase a total of 160,000 rounds. These guys were only looking out for their own interests, so Kim Jun had no reason to hold back either. Seeing no other option, the president of the Joint Chiefs finally gave in and ended the meeting right then and there. One by one, the other Joint Chiefs also left, except for one. This man, Kim Tae-ik, approached Kim Jun, intrigued by how different he was from the rumors. Instead of confrontation, he simply expressed interest in having a meal together, sometime when Kim Jun was free. Kim Jun shook hands with him, recognizing the name and understanding that this wasn't just a casual offer. Kim Tae-ik had one lingering question. Why was Kim Jun going to such lengths to ensure that the Korean military secured these advanced armor-piercing rounds? His company already had a massive deal with the US, so it wasn't like he stood to lose anything. At first, Kim Jun considered brushing it off with a simple answer, but then he decided to be honest. He believed that a country couldn't be defended with half-hearted patriotism alone. In modern warfare, military power wasn't just about numbers. It was about having an overwhelming technological advantage. Science, technology, and unwavering determination were what truly secured victory. If the military neglected its duty to develop and stockpile superior weapons, then he would personally force a change. Kim Tae-ik found his words bold, but he liked them. With that, they parted ways. Now that things had finally settled down, Kim Jun had only one thing left to do: start adjusting the factory lines immediately the next day and submit the necessary approvals for expedited processing. According to the chairman, the real concern wasn't just production or profits, it was the potential strain on their ties with the military. If the president of the Joint Chiefs ended up becoming the Minister of Defense, he could make things difficult for them. Keeping a powerful military figure in check was never easy. However, Kim Jun wasn't worried. He knew that the man wouldn't even last long in his current position. If history followed its course, a corruption scandal would eventually surface, forcing him to flee the military, and his entire faction would dissolve. Of course, he couldn't tell the chairman any of this. Instead, he simply reasoned that causes and effects existed for a reason. In that sense, he believed it would be a smarter move to bet on someone like Kim Tae-ik instead. Setting that discussion aside, the chairman directed Kim Jun to grab the documents from his desk and get them signed. It was the royalty agreement Kim Jun had been waiting for. According to the terms, he would receive 4% of the shares from the new armor-piercing rounds moving forward. On top of that, at tomorrow's group executive meeting, he was set to be promoted to policy director. It had only been a few months since Kim Jun returned, so the chairman warned him not to mess things up. Kim Jun, however, remained confident. He reassured the chairman that he wouldn't, then sincerely thanked him for believing in him. Later, at the airport, both the commander and deputy commander of the U.S. Forces Korea were present. They weren't there for a routine visit. They were waiting for General Michael, the U.S. Army representative who was set to arrive today. With a deal of this magnitude, it was no surprise that reporters had gathered at the airport, hoping to get a statement. Many of them wanted to approach Hyun-sung, but the tense atmosphere made it difficult. However, amidst the crowd, Kim Jun spotted someone and took the initiative to walk toward the reporters. He was specifically looking for the journalist who had helped him before. Once he found her, he expressed his gratitude and promised that once this deal was finalized, he would make sure to reach out to her first. She thought he was offering her an exclusive scoop, but Kim Jun dismissed it as nothing special. Even so, the other reporters were visibly envious. After all, how could a rookie journalist manage to form a connection with someone as influential as Kim Jun? Shortly after, General Michael finally arrived, and Kim Jun stepped forward to greet him. Alongside him was Lee Dong-wook, the deputy commander of the U.S.-Korea Combined Forces. After a brief conversation, they decided to leave together. To avoid the swarm of reporters at the main gate, Lee Dong-wook suggested that they take his car to the contract meeting location. As they prepared to leave, Lee Dong-wook pulled Kim Jun aside and asked if he was available to meet separately later. He had heard about Kim Jun's bold statement to Kim Tae-ik, the one about forcing a change in the military if necessary. Surprisingly, Lee Dong-wook agreed with his views and wanted to discuss them further. During the meeting, General Michael made a surprising proposal. He wanted to increase the order quantity to 700,000 rounds if possible. The reason was simple. The previously agreed upon 500,000 rounds were far from sufficient. The annual consumption just for training alone was significant, and due to policy requirements, the U.S. military needed to maintain stockpiles. There were also classified internal concerns that he couldn't disclose. Kim Jun considered the request and confirmed that it was possible, but it would require sacrifices from the U.S. military. Just like how the Korean Army secured its quantity, the solution lay in repurposing the high-explosive shell production lines. However, the cost of converting the production lines would have to be covered by the U.S. Army. This was a difficult decision for General Michael, but after some discussion, they agreed to proceed. However, there was a catch. If the delivery deadline was missed, a 5% penalty fee would be applied. Additionally, since the production line itself was being contracted, they agreed to make the payment in advance. Just when things seemed settled, General Michael introduced an unexpected condition. Kim Jun had anticipated that they wouldn't agree to an advance payment of 1.4 trillion won without some kind of catch. The condition was that, starting in 5 years with additional orders, they wanted permission for licensed production in the U.S. In other words, instead of full exports, Meletus would only supply parts, while U.S. defense companies would handle the final assembly. After some thought, Kim Jun decided to accept the deal. With that, the agreement was finalized. His total sales reached 1.4 trillion won, with an operating profit of 420 billion won. Thanks to his 4% royalty on sales, he personally earned 56 billion won, making an absolute fortune. Later, at his office, he reflected on his success. The jackpot from the armor-piercing rounds had elevated him to a position where he could now shape Meletus's policies. With this newfound influence, he finally had the foundation to push forward the development of smart munitions. However, the future technologies he envisioned were far beyond conventional weapons. Once introduced, they couldn't simply be brushed aside. These cutting-edge advancements would require state-of-the-art facilities and countless experiments. The next logical step was to establish a stable research institute to support his vision. Just as he was lost in thought, Kim Ji-ah interrupted him, relaying a message from his brother. Their family had arranged a gathering at the main house, and he was required to attend. Kim Jun clearly had no interest in going, but since his father had personally summoned him, skipping it wasn't an option. Kim Jun had made it all the way to the main house, yet he hesitated at the entrance. Even now, he couldn't find the courage to step inside. After all, he wasn't just any child. He was the illegitimate son of the chairman's mistress. His older brother, on the other hand, was the rightful heir, born to the chairman's actual wife. The thought of facing his stepmother again filled him with uncertainty. Would she look at him with cold indifference? Would she tolerate his presence only out of obligation? For a moment, he even considered turning back. But before he could make a move, his stepmother suddenly rushed out from inside, nearly making his heart jump out of his chest. He had braced himself for a harsh, dismissive greeting, perhaps something along the lines of, "Eat up and get lost from my house." But what happened next was completely unexpected. With a warm smile, she grabbed his hand and pulled him inside. She welcomed him home as if nothing had ever changed, as if this was just another ordinary family dinner. As he stepped inside, memories of his childhood with her flooded back. While his biological mother had abandoned him, it was his stepmother who had always been there. She had raised him, cared for him, and treated him like her own son from the very beginning. Accepting a child from her husband's affair couldn't have been easy, yet she had done it without hesitation. And now, despite everything, she still saw him as part of the family. At the dining table, the atmosphere started out warm and familiar. Like any typical mother, his stepmother fussed over Hyun-sung, piling food into his bowl, insisting that he had lost weight. He barely had time to protest before another spoonful landed in front of him. Meanwhile, his brother, who was also present, took a moment to congratulate him on securing such a massive contract. However, the conversation quickly shifted to a more serious topic. His brother mentioned that the president of the Joint Chiefs of Staff had personally called him, complaining about feeling slighted. From his perspective, it seemed like they were deliberately being isolated. Since the president of the Joint Chiefs was the strongest candidate for the next defense minister, his brother argued that there was no real need to provoke him so openly. Thanks to Hyun-sung, they were now completely at odds with the military, which could seriously impact their business. His brother soon grew frustrated, starting to panic over the possible repercussions. He accused Hyun-sung of always acting selfishly, caring only about his own interests while disregarding the family's well-being. But Hyun-sung wasn't about to sit there and take it. He snapped back. The chairman, who had been quietly observing up until now, finally intervened, shutting both of them down. He addressed Hyun-sung's older brother first, telling him not to worry because the president of the Joint Chiefs was going to be ousted soon. It was practically inevitable. According to him, just a few days ago, the army leadership had sent a petition to the Blue House exposing the corruption he was involved in. Since the army held the strongest influence within the military, the Blue House was thrown into chaos. The petition, coming directly from the top brass, left no room for doubt. The president of the Joint Chiefs had completely lost the army's trust, and someone who had lost the support of the army could never become the Minister of Defense. Instead of rising to power, he might end up under investigation instead. Hyun-sung's brother was completely blindsided by this revelation. His father then turned to him and pointed out the real issue. He had failed to gather critical intelligence as the strategy director. He had relied solely on the president of the Joint Chiefs status while failing to assess the bigger picture. Because of that, he had embarrassed himself in front of Hyun-sung. Defeated, he quietly excused himself from the dinner table and left. His mother, watching him go, looked a little sad, which made Kim Jun regret his decision to fight back. If only he had held back a little longer, maybe things wouldn't have turned out this way. Later, as he was about to leave the house, his mother stopped him. She had packed a lunchbox for him to take home. Feeling guilty, he apologized for causing a mess at dinner, but she simply told him not to worry about it. Then, out of nowhere, Kim Jun hesitated before asking if she didn't hate him. She looked at him gently and explained that she never did, because to her, both he and his brother were her precious children. The next day, even while sitting in his office, Kim Jun couldn't shake off thoughts about Hyun-sung's family issues, despite the fact that they weren't even his real family. Eventually, he decided to push it aside and focus on his own goals, specifically Miletus. However, there was a major problem. His brother owned around 8% of the company's shares, which was more than double his own. If things continued like this, he would end up growing the company just to hand it over to his brother. Since there was no way his father would transfer more shares to him, he realized that securing his stake would have to be done through his own efforts. Determined, he called Secretary Kim Jia and asked her to prepare a list. He wanted to liquidate the assets on it as soon as possible. The total amounted to around 30 billion won, with about 20 billion in bearer bonds. Curious about his intentions, she questioned him, and he revealed that he was finally taking control of Miletus. However, she knew just as well as he did that 30 billion won wouldn't be enough to buy control of the company. But that wasn't his plan. Instead of purchasing shares directly, he intended to combine this money with the 56 billion won from his royalties to establish and stabilize his own research institute. His strategy was clear. His institute would focus solely on technology development, while Miletus would handle production. The institute would generate revenue through intellectual property patents and advanced materials, both of which had enormous added value. Whenever those materials were sold or used, he would receive substantial technology fees, and with those profits, he would gradually buy Miletus's shares. Kim Jia was still struggling to understand how they were supposed to generate revenue if they weren't producing and selling physical products. Kim Jun explained it to her with an analogy. It was like a successful comic book. A hit comic doesn't just sell copies worldwide. It also gets adapted into movies, games, and merchandise. Every time one of these products sells, a portion of the revenue goes to the creator. The author doesn't print the comics themselves, nor do they make the movies or games, yet they still profit. Similarly, when someone produces or uses materials developed by his institute for weapons, they must pay him a technology fee. That's what patents are for. With this plan in mind, his research institute was finally set in motion. After much effort, the construction of the institute was completed. The only thing left was to install the high-end equipment imported from Germany, and then it would be fully operational. To show his appreciation for Kim Jia's hard work, he decided to give her a performance bonus. Since this research lab was his personal project and not a company initiative, he felt it was only right to compensate her separately. When she opened the envelope, she was shocked to find 50 million won as a bonus. But that wasn't all. He also gave her an additional normal bonus. On top of that, he told her to visit a department store and fully outfit herself with luxury items. Since she would be working closely with him from now on, he emphasized that looking the part was just as important as the work itself. Later, we see Kim Jun was sitting outside a shop, waiting for someone. It wasn't long before the person finally arrived, Kim Hee-won, an old friend from the past. After some casual conversation about their friends and life, Kim Jun quickly got to the point. He wanted Kim Hee-won to work with him. Since he had recently started a research lab, he needed someone capable to manage it. However, things weren't going to be that easy. Kim Hee-won was currently employed at one of the top companies in the country. No matter how close they were, leaving a stable job to join a brand new research lab with no track record wasn't something he could agree to so easily. Without hesitation, he rejected Kim Jun's offer. Kim Jun, however, wasn't going to give up that easily. He immediately offered to triple Kim Hee-won's salary if he joined. Despite the tempting offer, Kim Hee-won still hesitated. It was clear that he wanted to accept, but something was holding him back. That's when Kim Jun played his final card, offering him a brand new red Porsche. At that moment, Kim Hee-won's hesitation crumbled. The deal was too good to resist, and he finally gave in, even agreeing to start working from the very next day. With that settled, Kim Jun gave him a brief rundown of the research lab's objectives. Kim Hee-won would serve as the lab director and continue his work on specialized metals while also being responsible for recruiting researchers. Since their research required expertise from multiple fields, including textiles, chemistry, semiconductor design, and software development, Kim Hee-won was tasked with bringing in the best talents from each area. Kim Jun even mentioned a specific candidate from CASTE who would be ideal for the job. Right now, they needed at least 80 people to get things running, and Kim Hee-won would be at the forefront of developing new patented mirror technology. Seeing how confident Kim Jun was, he told him not to worry and just follow his lead. Kim Hee-won couldn't help but be surprised. The energy Hyunsung was giving off reminded him of Kim Jun. I mean, he's him. For a brief moment, he found himself confused by the similarities between them. 3 months passed, and everything was running smoothly. Kim Jun wondered if there was anything he could personally assist with, but Kim Jia advised against it. She explained that getting too involved with the staff would only disrupt their workflow. It was best to leave things to the departments in charge. More importantly, Kim Hee-won from the Research Institute had specifically requested his presence today. Hearing this, Kim Jun's expectations rose. If Kim Hee-won had called him personally, it likely meant that there had been a major breakthrough in research. Eager to see what had been developed, he made his way to the institute. Upon arrival, Kim Hee-won handed over the result of his latest work, a nanowire shock absorber. It was as soft as a sponge, but Kim Jun immediately recognized its significance. In his past life, he had tested this exact material, and just by touching it, he could tell it was the core material for smart projectiles. This absorber was designed to protect internal precision components from the extreme 20,000 G muzzle pressure. Impressed, Kim Jun praised Hee-won for his hard work. Despite giving him all the blueprints for cutting-edge technologies, he had still kept their true source a secret. But Hee-won, despite his exhausted, zombie-like appearance, was someone Kim Jun deeply trusted. In his previous life, Kim Hee-won had been the greatest friend and most reliable person he had ever known. Now, in this era, Kim Jun was determined to repay the debt he owed him. Before leaving, Kim Hee-won informed Kim Jun that the semiconductor team had successfully achieved the 90mm process. He suggested that Kim Jun visit them to see the results for himself. Speaking of patents, Hee-won also mentioned that two companies, Matsubashi and Chenin, had contacted them regarding the licensing of their recently registered tantalum microcoating technology. Both companies were offering around 10 billion won for the rights. Without hesitation, Kim Jun instructed him to reject the offers, which made Hee-won furious. To him, turning down such a massive deal seemed absurd. However, Kim Jun was firm in his decision. No matter how much they offered, they absolutely couldn't sell to neighboring countries. Besides, there were plenty of other buyers willing to pay just as much. But money wasn't the real issue here. The real problem was that these companies had originally attempted to develop this technology in the early 2000s, as recorded in his previous life. Yet now they were years ahead of schedule. His regression might have unintentionally accelerated historical progress. If that were the case, he could lose his lead. He had to act fast. His first course of action was to push the researchers harder. There was no time to waste. However, Hee-won immediately protested, frustrated that he was being treated like a slave. Kim Jun, unfazed, casually pulled out his checkbook and announced that whoever delivered results ahead of schedule would receive a 1 million won bonus. Suddenly, Hee-won's attitude shifted. He became extremely polite, very polite. Later, Kim Jun was seen in the chairman's office requesting a meeting with Samjong's chairman, Lee Young-moon. He explained that he needed their man sensor modules for a weapon he was developing. Samjong was the only company capable of producing precision sensors of that quality. However, the chairman seemed more interested in the weapon itself rather than the meeting. Nothing was currently in development at Miletus, so this was the first he was hearing of such a project. That's when Kim Jun realized he had made a mistake. He still hadn't informed the chairman about his new research institute. Now, he had no choice but to explain. He introduced the concept of a new weapon called the Smart Shell, a guided shell equipped with a navigation system that could extend its effective range to 150 kilometers. It functions similarly to a missile, but cost only 45 million won per shell. Compared to missiles that cost at least 1 billion won each, it was an incredibly cost-effective alternative. This technology wouldn't just benefit them. Even the U.S. Navy would be eager to get their hands on it. In fact, the U.S. had already attempted to develop precision-guided shells, pouring nearly 2 trillion won into the project, only to fail miserably. Kim Jun then presented the titanium-based nanowire shock absorber to the chairman. He explained that the biggest challenge in developing guided shells was the lack of an effective cushion to protect the internal electronic systems. Until now, this limitation made guided shells impossible to manufacture. But with this new shock absorber, they had finally solved the problem. It could withstand Mach 3 muzzle velocity and was compatible with a new type of explosive several times more powerful than traditional gunpowder. The only remaining step was designing and manufacturing precision-guided electronics, which was why he needed Chairman Lee Young-moon's help. The chairman suddenly asked if this technology had come from Kim Jun's own research lab. So he knew about the lab after all. Without hesitation, he then questioned why Kim Jun was so desperate to earn money that he had gone to the extent of creating his own research institute. Without missing a beat, Kim Jun responded, "Because I want to take over Miletus." The chairman was clearly entertained by this bold statement. Instead of being upset, he seemed intrigued and told Kim Jun that he would arrange the meeting, but on one condition: he wanted a share of the profits. After some discussion, they reached an agreement. Just as Kim Jun was about to leave, the chairman left him with a final remark. "Give it your all. I still haven't decided who will inherit Miletus yet." The meeting was soon arranged with Chairman Lee Young-moon. Interestingly, Chairman Lee had already been keeping an eye on Kim Jun for quite some time. Lately, he had been hearing quite a few things about him, and even his own son had shown an interest in Kim Jun's activities. Wasting no time, Chairman Lee got straight to the point and asked Kim Jun why he wanted them to develop MEMS-based sensor modules. Kim Jun explained that his project required the development of various MEMS-based sensor modules, including gyroscopes and accelerometers, among others. Given their current technological capabilities, he was confident that they would be able to handle the task. He then added that he had a method to enhance accuracy, which would make semiconductors the more rational choice for their needs. However, developing what he was asking for would require them to establish a new defense division, which he was willing to take responsibility for. Furthermore, Kim Jun highlighted a major advantage. The smart shells they were developing were exportable to the U.S. military. If they could successfully secure a deal with the U.S., it would validate the reliability of their technology and attract interest from other nations as well. To solidify his proposal, Kim Jun handed over a summarized report detailing the concept and development process of the smart shells. After carefully reviewing the proposal, Lee Young-moon was stunned. This concept wasn't just pushing boundaries. It was far ahead of its time, almost like creating the future itself. The sheer innovation behind it convinced him that this opportunity was too valuable to pass up, and he agreed to take on Kim Jun's request. As the meeting progressed, the atmosphere lightened, and the two eventually started drinking. During their conversation, Lee Young-moon asked for Kim Jun's opinion on a critical issue, whether focusing on semiconductors was the right move for his group. Kim Jun, without hesitation, advised him not to abandon the CPU market. He specifically referred to the alpha chip that Lee Young-moon was attempting to develop in Yahello in partnership with D2C. He acknowledged that Samjong Group had been facing financial struggles, but if they acquired D2C and continued developing locking CPUs, they would dominate the semiconductor industry in the next 20 years. After some time, Lee Young-moon admitted that his group was struggling with developing 180-nanometer processors, and it still felt like a distant dream to them. Then, Kim Jun casually dropped a bombshell. He had the process to manufacture 90-nanometer processors. This shocked everyone in the room because, at the moment, the traditional technology was capped at 130 nanometers, but his lab had already surpassed that limit by enhancing electron mobility. He even claimed that his lab could push the boundaries further and achieve 45 nanometers. Lee Young-moon was baffled. Why was Kim Jun openly revealing such groundbreaking technology? If he had this level of advancement, he could dominate the global semiconductor market by producing chips himself. But Kim Jun had a different plan. He wasn't interested in investing tens of trillions of won into building semiconductor factories. Instead, Lee Young-moon's group already had an excellent IDM, integrated device manufacturer setup. In other words, he wanted them to be his foundry. Building a factory just for military semiconductors would be ridiculous. But since they had developed 90-nanometer processors, expanding into the fabless market would bring huge additional revenue. It was a win-win situation. And finally, Kim Jun didn't even sugarcoat it. He chose Lee Young-moon's group because he could extract the most money from them. He said it straight to his face. At that moment, Lee Young-moon had complete clarity. One thing was certain: he must never turn Kim Jun into an enemy.